For decades, paleontologists kept finding dinosaur bones with strange bite marks that didn't match any known predator, gouges too deep and too round to have come from another dinosaur. And for a long time, nobody could quite agree on what had actually been doing the biting. Some assumed it was scavenging damage. Some assumed it was just an unusually aggressive theropod with weird teeth. But eventually, the evidence pointed somewhere nobody really wanted it to point, because it turned out the culprit wasn't a dinosaur at all. It was a crocodile, not the kind sunning itself on a riverbank today, minding its own business, until something wanders too close to the water. This was something else entirely, something that spent tens of millions of years treating dinosaurs not as a threat to avoid, but as a meal option. Let's start with what we're actually talking about, because the name alone should tell you everything you need to know. Deinosuchus, which translates roughly to terrible crocodile, lived across parts of North America during the late Cretaceous, somewhere between about 82 and 75 million years ago, which puts it right in the thick of dinosaur dominance. Not some quiet earlier era before the big theropods showed up. And despite the name suggesting a close relationship to modern crocodiles, Deinosuchus actually belonged to an earlier branch of the crocodilian family tree, more of a distant cousin than a direct ancestor, which is honestly a relief, because if something like this were still swimming around today, going anywhere near fresh water would require a serious rethink. So how big are we actually talking? Estimates for Deinosuchus put full-grown adults somewhere between 10 and 12 meters, or roughly 33 to 39 feet, based primarily on skull measurements, since skulls tend to survive fossilization far better than the rest of the skeleton. Just to put that into perspective, that's longer than a school bus, and depending on the individual, potentially pushing close to the length of two adult killer whales laid end to end. Weight estimates land somewhere around 5 to 8.5 tons for the largest individuals, which means you're looking at something roughly as heavy as a large adult African elephant, except low to the ground, mostly submerged, and built entirely around the business of ambush. And here's the detail that tends to get overlooked. Its skull alone could reach nearly 2 meters, or about 6 feet, in length, which is longer than most adult humans are tall. So before you even get to teeth or bite force, just the head of this thing was already bigger than you. Speaking of bite force, this is where things get genuinely absurd. Estimates for Deinosuchus's bite have landed anywhere from 23,000 up to over 100,000 newtons, depending on the study and methodology used, with even the more conservative figures comfortably exceeding bite force estimates for Tyrannosaurus rex, which for a long time held the reputation as the strongest bite of the Mesozoic. So yes, pound for pound, jaw for jaw, this crocodile likely outbit the most famous predator in the entire fossil record, and it didn't need speed or agility to make that bite count, because unlike a chasing predator, Deinosuchus wasn't interested in a fair fight or a long pursuit. It specialized in the ambush, the same strategy modern crocodilians use today, just scaled up to a size that turned ambush into something closer to inevitable. And this is where those strange bite marks come back into the picture, because researchers examining hadrosaur and other dinosaur fossils from Deinosuchus's range have found puncture wounds and healed bite scars consistent with an attack that the dinosaur actually survived, at least temporarily, which tells us two important things. First, that Deinosuchus was actively targeting dinosaurs that came near the water's edge, not just opportunistically scavenging carcasses that happened to wash up. And second, that even a creature the size of a hadrosaur, which could weigh several tons itself, wasn't guaranteed a clean escape once those jaws closed. The likely method, based on comparisons to modern crocodilian hunting behavior, was the classic ambush and drag technique, lying motionless just beneath the surface near a watering hole, waiting for a dinosaur to lower its head to drink, and then exploding upward with enough force to clamp down and drag the animal into deeper water, where the fight, if you could even call it that, would quickly end in the crocodile's favor. Now, if Deinosuchus alone isn't unsettling enough, it's worth bringing in a relative from a slightly earlier and slightly different part of the world, because North America wasn't the only place growing crocodilians on an absurd scale. Over in what's now Africa, during the early Cretaceous, roughly 112 million years ago, a separate lineage produced Sarcosuchus, sometimes nicknamed Super Croc, for reasons that become obvious pretty quickly. Sarcosuchus reached similarly staggering lengths, with estimates placing large individuals around 9 to 12 meters, putting it firmly in the same size range as Deinosuchus, despite evolving independently and millions of years apart. The two weren't the same animal and weren't even closely related within the crocodilian family tree, but they arrived at strikingly similar solutions to the same basic problem, which is that if you're a crocodilian sharing your ecosystem with dinosaurs, getting enormous is a remarkably effective way to make sure you're never the one being hunted. Sarcosuchus had its own distinguishing feature too, a bulbous growth at the tip of its snout called a bulla, the exact function of which is still debated, with theories ranging from enhanced smell to vocalization to simple display for attracting mates. But functionally, its hunting strategy would have looked much the same as Deinosuchus's: ambush from the water, overwhelming size, and bite force doing most of the work, minimal need for speed or finesse. So across two different continents and tens of millions of years apart, evolution essentially arrived at the same terrifying answer twice, which is either a coincidence or a pretty strong hint about just how effective this particular body plan was against dinosaur-dominated ecosystems. So why aren't things like this still around? The honest answer is that both Deinosuchus and Sarcosuchus eventually went extinct well before the end Cretaceous mass extinction event that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, likely due to a combination of environmental shifts, changing waterway ecosystems, and possibly competition or prey availability changes as the specific dinosaur populations they relied on shifted over time. Modern crocodilians, the ones you'd actually encounter today, are descended from separate, generally smaller-bodied lineages that emerged and diversified afterward, which is honestly one of the more comforting facts to come out of this entire topic, because it means the line connecting ambush predators of the Cretaceous to the crocodiles sunning themselves in rivers today isn't as direct as the shared name might suggest, but it's still worth sitting with the basic fact for a second that for tens of millions of years, in more than one part of the world, being a dinosaur near freshwater wasn't automatically safe just because you were a dinosaur. Size, armor, even raw predatory reputation didn't matter much to something that didn't need to chase you, didn't need to outrun you, and only needed you to lower your head. for a drink. So the next time you see a crocodile at a zoo or a nature documentary looking relatively modest by comparison, remember that its ancestors weren't always the smaller player in the room. There was a stretch of prehistory where the crocodile wasn't hiding from the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were the ones that should have been hiding from it. Thanks for watching, and until next time.